This episode is brought to you by Audi. The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV, it's a new way to experience driving. The all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron is here. The next chapter of Audi starts now.
I was never really a runner. The way I see running is a gift, especially when you have stage 4 cancer. I'm Anne. I'm running the Boston Marathon, presented by Bank of America. I run for Dana-Farber Cancer Institute to give people like me a chance to thrive in life, even with cancer.
Join Bank of America in helping Anne's cause. Give if you can at BofA.com/supportAnne. What would you like the power to do? References to charitable organizations is not an endorsement by Bank of America Corporation. Copyright 2025.
Hey, I'm Amanda from Trifecta Fitness. We're proud to be Clarksville's new Get Fit headquarters. Trifecta Fitness is a state-of-the-art spin and strength training studio. Our spin studio is truly one of a kind in this area, complete with 20 state-of-the-art live fitness bikes and an incredible sound system. Our strength training is done in small groups of 6 or fewer, and all of our strength and spin classes are scalable for every level of experience. Come see us in the heart of Clarksville, just behind MAPCO at the corner of Old Trenton Road and Wilma Rudolph Boulevard. Call us for more info at 931-542-6265 or download our Trifecta Fitness app for a full list of upcoming classes.
In October 2019, Arlington, Texas was chosen to be the home of a new national museum, unlike any other. The National Medal of Honor Museum will be a unique home of military history. The 100,000 square foot museum will house exhibits, archives, and artifacts relating to the 3,500 U.S. troops who have been awarded the medal, the nation's highest honor for valor in combat. The museum will have 31,000 square feet of galleries dedicated to U.S. troops who have received the award. The museum CEO, former Navy SEAL and NASA astronaut Chris Cassidy, said the museum will focus on education as much as preservation. The building will have 5 areas dedicated to Medal of Honor winners from the Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, and Coast Guard. The main gallery will be located in a central plaza under a 25,000 square foot slab of steel, which will appear to be suspended in midair. It will be supported by 5 pillars. Black Rifle Coffee is a corporate sponsor of the museum, as are the Dallas Cowboys. The museum's board also includes over a dozen major corporations and 6 Medal of Honor recipients, including David Bellavia, Patrick Brady, and Britt Slabinski. Army Staff Sergeant Bellavia was awarded the medal for clearing an entire house by himself on November 10, 2004, as a squad leader in support of Operation Phantom Fury in Fallujah, Iraq. He killed 4 enemy fighters and wounded a 5th in close quarters battle. Army Major General Brady flew and coordinated the evacuation of 51 seriously wounded men during a firefight in Vietnam in January 1968. Slabinski, a Navy SEAL chief and team leader, led a rescue team of SEALs during Operation Anaconda in Afghanistan in March 2002. Slabinski and his team flew to a mountaintop ambush site to rescue Petty Officer First Class Neil Roberts, who had fallen from the back of a helicopter. Slabinski led the team through almost constant combat against an entrenched Taliban force. Along with the board members, former presidents Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama serve as honorary directors. The museum is expected to open to the public in late 2024.
All right. Welcome back.
MisFitNation. MisFitNation. The MisFitNation show.
We are a show founded by a veteran and hosted by 2 veterans and a military spouse. Our mission is to get people to tell their stories to the world. If you're an author, share your tips with the Misfit Nation. If you're a musician or an actor, our audience needs to know how they too can get into the business. Coaches, we love our coaches. Come on and share your tips with the Misfit Nation to help them become better versions of themselves. If you are a corporate leader or an entrepreneur, come on and show how you did it and how hard you have fought for success. If you are a veteran, first responder, or Gold Star family, we would love to have you come on and share your story with the Misfit Nation. we always have time for you. If you're feeling down, alone, or starting to see the darkness, stop. Think about those who are around you. You are not alone. You will be missed. If you feel like your problems will be a burden to those in your inner circle or feel embarrassed, dial 988. If you are a veteran, take option 1. We need you to keep pushing forward. Don't make a permanent solution to a temporary problem. If you are a new listener, welcome to the MisFitNation Show. Be sure to subscribe to our show on your favorite podcast app. Also on our YouTube channel at @the_MisFitNation. Subscribe and click the bell to keep you up to date on our latest episodes and all of our news. You can also find us on Heroes Media Group and About Face Radio. Now, let's get to the show!
All right. Welcome back to the Misfit Nation. It's your Thursday after dinner show. We got a good one tonight. Also have good news. There's no reports of any end of watch in the last couple days, so that's a good thing. And this will be our last live show for 2024. We'll be back the first week of January 2025 with a full slate of shows the Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday, so look out for those. Tonight we have an absolutely phenomenal guest. He is a man of many talents. He's a New York Times bestselling author, an award-winning filmmaker, an entrepreneur, and co-founder of Save Our Allies, which rescued over 12,000 people from Afghanistan. Oh, and did I mention he's also a former grunt, U.S. Army, West Point graduate. So, Nick, welcome to the show, brother.
Hey, thanks so much for having me, Rich. I appreciate it.
It's great to have you here, and we almost met the other night, but we were both going different directions. You were exhausted, and I was kind of running on fumes leaving the stadium, but it was great to see you kind of in person.
I would have stopped, but I was literally carrying a 50-pound box. And
it was a big box, yeah.
I was, and I was in like a jacket. So I'm like sweating in the jacket, and I just kind of see Adam out of the corner of my eye, and he's like, "You're on Rich's show in 2 days." And I was like, "I'll talk to you then," yeah.
It's great. Usually I don't get to meet my guest before, but I was kind of sort of met you, so it was awesome to actually see you and put a face and a body to the name.
Yeah,
it was awesome. I can see your face.
I'm really underwhelming in real life,
Yeah,
like, that's it.
That's all he brings to the table.
That's all he's got. Man, I'm like, what's his face from Dalton. I thought he'd be bigger.
I thought he'd be bigger.
Yeah, I'm 5'8". I'm 5'8" by 5'8".
We all get like that. It's okay. So Nick, I gave the I guess the Cliff Notes version of your bio there. If you don't mind, Tell the Misfit Nation a little bit more about you from as far back as you want to go to how we got to where we are today.
Man, like I'm Italian, so you've got to tighten it up like that because I'll just talk for hours on end.
So we might have a long show. We're both Italian. It's gonna be rough.
You want like a quick version? You want like the short? Like what are we looking for here?
Let's just go above what I do with the Cliff Notes and below the Encyclopedia Britannica.
All right. Grew up, born in Providence, Rhode Island. Grew up in Italy. Came back from Italy and moved outside of Boston. And they were like, "Oh, cool. You speak Italian. Say something." And then I did. And then they beat me up. That lasted for like 2 years, which is why I started taking judo. I wanted to do karate because Karate Kid 2 was like the hype at that point in time because I'm old. And karate was too far away. So my mom made me do judo instead. I was disappointed at the time, but ended up being a great, great option. Judo led to wrestling. Wrestling led to West Point. West Point led to the infantry. When I got out of the military, I had a very challenging transition, even though I landed in grad school. So like nobody should feel bad for me on paper, but as I was starting, business school, I one of my favorite soldiers was killed in combat. Massive guilt that made my transition harder. Got my Fortune 100 gig, did well, but the whole time hated it. Felt like even though the company was great, I just felt like I was living a purposeless life. Started a hobby with a buddy to kind of stay connected. That hobby was an apparel brand called Ranger Up. It was the first military apparel brand direct to the consumer. I grew that to an 8-figure business. It was never supposed to be it was supposed to be a hobby that I did for fun and maybe made like a couple extra bucks, but never expected it to be what it became. Sold that business. And when I did, I had to work for them for a year. And then COVID hit around that period of time when my year was finishing, and they wanted to lay people off just across all their businesses because it was bought by a private equity firm, just to kind of hedge against what might happen. And so I said, hey, how about instead of laying them off, I'll quit so you don't have to lay anybody off. I did that. And then they were like, well, if you're not there, we're going to lay everyone off. So they did that. And they said, tell everybody next Friday is their last day unless they want to move to Ohio. Nobody wants to move to Ohio because it's Ohio. And so, came in on Monday and said, hey guys, I'm sorry, on Friday and said, hey guys, next Friday, I got some good news and some bad news. Bad news is you're all getting laid off. Good news is if you want, you can start at the same salary in my new company. And they said, what is that? I said, I will tell you on Monday. And then over that weekend, I dreamt up Diesel Jack Media, named after a Jack Russell Terrier that I had for 15 years. Nice. And that's how my current company started. That was 4.5 years ago, almost 5. It'll be 5 in February. And a year after I started Diesel Jack, the fall of Afghanistan happened. My friend Sarah Verardo called me and asked if I would go to Afghanistan and help evacuate people. And I said, are you joking? Because I wasn't that cool when I was in. I'm not that cool now. And now I am knocking on the door of 50. But she said, I trust you and we have an opportunity to do a lot of good. So I asked my wife. She said yes. And 24 hours later, I was flying to first to the Emirates and then to Afghanistan. And was with some phenomenal people, 12 middle-aged dudes, Tim Kennedy, C. Spray, Sean G., Sean Lee, Joe Robert, just like really phenomenal people that I will always treasure. And we worked our asses off for 10 days. Sean G., C. Spray, and Tim did the dangerous stuff. I loaded planes and built manifests to get sent off to be approved. Then the bomb went off, all operations stopped. We eventually got back to the United States. I think I landed back in the US 1 September. Joe Robert continued to stay there for until about 4 months ago when we finally got the last of the Afghans that were there home. There's still a few there, but for different reasons, but all the ones that will ever get to the US are now in the US. And went back to my job at Diesel Jack. And then every once in a while, I go on trips. I've spent a few months, since then in UAE, in Pakistan, helping build, safe houses and getting people out. I've spent time in Ukraine. I've spent time on the Haitian border. Not me, but our team has spent time in, Israel, Gaza, Syria. Basically, it's just a phenomenal group of veterans and former intelligence types that we go wherever there's a problem until such time that the government has a handle on it. And then we leave. Diesel Jack has grown to a pretty meaningful company, and I missed one critical thing. Right before I sold Ranger Up, I made a movie called Range 15 with the guys that at the time owned a company called Article 15. But they went on to create Black Rifle Coffee after the movie was shot. And that movie was called Range 15, the first independent film ever to go to #1 on Amazon and #2 on iTunes, because we missed out to Angry Birds. I'll always hate that cartoon. And once, Diesel Jack had some stability and we had, great customers and we were doing things right, I decided it was time to get back into doing something, fun and creative. And I also felt like the military community hasn't had anything positive in a while. And so I wrote a show called Office Joe, which is a comedy about a veteran transitioning from the infantry to being a designer at a marketing firm. And we launched that in November. It's done very well. We've had thousands of people download it, and the reviews are stellar. I think we're a 9.1 on IMDb and a perfect 5 on Amazon. And we're just trying to get that to the next level and try to get it a little more mainstream. And it's just a great project. We had incredible talent in the show, and super happy with it. So that about brings me up to right now. I think there's other things in there somewhere, but that was an Italian 2 minutes. So it was probably like 17 minutes.
That was a pretty good Italian 2 minutes. I mean, growing up in an Italian family, I think that was actually a good abridged version of the Italian version of doing it there. That's outstanding. You talked about Save Our Allies. You talked about your military career a little bit. Where did you get to serve with the military?
So I was stationed at 136 Infantry, which was in Friedberg, Germany, and then deployed from there. And then I was also at Fort Benning, Georgia, where I spent time as, of all things, I did not expect to ever be in my life, cadre at the Ranger Training Brigade. Oh, wow. And it was weird walking back onto that, because the only memories I had of that place were terrible. And so, I really enjoyed everything I did in the military. I think I would have stayed in longer if it weren't for a couple of different things. One, I had a couple of officers that really changed the trajectory of my feeling about the military in a negative way. And then I had 2 great officers that almost changed my mind back. It was weird. I joined the military and I was like, I'm in for 20, 25 years. Like, this is what I want to do. And I'll tell you, my very first commander, my very first day on the job, I didn't even know that the soldier that was walking into the office was going to be in my platoon. But I'm sitting in the talk at a training exercise. And this guy walks in, it's a sergeant, and he goes, hey, sir, I need to go home. My mom is dying and she's in the hospital. And I was expecting, because again, like you live like the pure, like at West Point, you're taught like you're supposed to be purer than the driven snow, which results in either really weird officers or really earnest officers. But so that was beaten into my head. And then the officer basic course and Ranger school, it's like leadership. And this dude looks this sergeant right in the eye and says, "Are you a doctor?" And he goes, "No, sir." He's like, "Are you a nurse?" "No, sir." "Well, then there's nothing that you can do for your mom, but you can help your guys max gunnery."
Yeah.
So that was my first commander, just to kind of set the tone for my early experience as an officer. So anyway, that was part of the reason. The other part of the reason was that my ex-wife, and fair play to her, I actually think she said the right thing. She said, I'm with you as long as you want to stay in, but if you're staying in, we're not having kids until you're out. And so those 2 reasons were the reasons that ultimately got me out. So, but it was very bittersweet. I came really close to staying in, and I think that's probably why I ended up staying in the community so much, because I was on a totally different trajectory. I got out and I was like, okay, like, I did my time. I did what I was supposed to do. I feel good about the work I did. It's time for the next thing. Because my dad was a Vietnam vet. He was a ALO for Special Forces Group. in the Air Force ALO for Special Forces Group. You got to be crazy specific nowadays because somebody will come, your dad wasn't SF. Like, no, he wasn't. He was in ALO. But anyway.
Be perfect with what you say.
Yes. But and I didn't even know he was military until my brother and I found his uniforms and a plaque that said First Special Forces Group, ALO, Vietnam, 71, in her hope chest. We were like, what's this? Like, oh yeah, your dad's a Vietnam vet, it was, but so he had kind of like, he served, he did his job, and then he had gone on to be successful in the civilian world. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do that. Well, like I had mentioned earlier, right as I started business school, Bill Mayer was killed. And then, that kind of sat over my head, and it was like, should I have stayed in? And all the stupid questions, like, if I was there, would it have gone different? Like, of course it wouldn't have. And, you probably would have screwed it up more because Jared was a much better officer than you are. And, but you're still saying those things to yourself. And, when I started my hobby, because I had been donating time teaching the ROTC students in the area, Army combatives. And so, Duke is one of the only ROTC programs in the area. So a lot of kids from other schools come there. And so I'd get up at like 4 a.m. I'd open up the wrestling room. They'd all show up in at the time, BDUs, and we'd train. And so I was teaching them, and the kids were like, hey, Nick, we really want T-shirts that are cool, but everything out there is like skulls and snakes and death from above. So I started making my students. I just went to Michael's and I bought a bunch of white T-shirts and transfer paper, and I printed using literally paint. I printed out these funny designs that me and a buddy made, and we just gave them to the kids so they could walk around in something that was kind of funny. And they were like, these are great. You should hire a designer so that you could actually make shirts that don't suck and sell these. And I didn't do anything with that idea for a while. And then, as I got frustrated with my day job, because after I graduated, I was still volunteering my time with the ROTC. I was like, yeah, maybe I will do that. And so me and a buddy threw 30, 40 grand into a pot and started, built a website and printed a bunch of shirts and, figured out how we were going to fulfill it. And because there was no Printful back then, there was no Shopify, there were no easy things. Everything had to be custom built because, again, I'm old. And that's how Ranger Up started. And there was no Facebook. So ads, you had to advertise. And the way I advertised was I wrote articles in mill blogs and sponsored websites and stuff. It was a really interesting time. It was much harder to be successful than it is now. Now you can kind of start something pretty quickly with almost no investment. But back then, it was like a real investment. And that brought me to people writing me from Afghanistan and Iraq. And I started getting involved in really weird things. So one of the first things, I want to say it's the last major thing that I did before I quit my corporate gig, is I literally helped put on an MMA fight in Mosul, Iraq, at the height of the conflict there in 2009.
Wow.
And it was a random group of people. I was it was so random. And we ended up, then Lieutenant Colonel, now General Volke, was kind of the dude on the other end that, that thought it might be a cool thing for his soldiers. And this woman, Monica, she had access to some referees and promoters. And long story short, it's we ended up flying in the middle of like, a very heavy time of combat. We put on this MMA fight, and it was like 14 amateur fights and like 6 pro fights. And then that's where I met a good friend of mine there, and he was one of the pro fights. And after the fight, he loaded up his squad, about half of which fought on the amateur side, and they went out and did a mission, and they had contact that night, and I became friends with a lot of those guys. But the squad leader was Patrick Miller, who went on to be, a well-respected pro and a BJJ black belt. And, so it's like a lot of these relationships that I had, like when people are like, oh, how'd you end up sponsoring this guy or that guy? Like, there's some real history with a lot of these dudes that I know. So it's not just like I know these people because they're popular. Like, I knew most of these guys, whether you're talking about the Black Rifle crew, you're talking about Tim Kennedy, Pat, for that matter, David Bellavia and Marcus Luttrell. I knew those guys before they were popular. I met David Bellavia and Marcus Luttrell in the back of a school bus that my friend Jim Hansen had rented for a tour called the Heroes Tour, where he was like bringing these guys around and just having them tell stories to different people that would want to hear their stories before any of their formal stuff happened. And the first time I met Marcus Luttrell, we were drinking Coors Lights in the back of a school bus like we were high school kids. So, it's been a really interesting ride that has brought me kind of my military life. I'm very proud of, but it's nothing like impressive. My civilian life has been very interesting. It's brought me, in and out of a lot of war zones and in and out of a lot of situations, some of which are just kind of interesting. Some of them are very, are the stuff of books, and some of them are just funny, and it's been an interesting life, largely because I started a t-shirt company and have been sucked into so many different things as a result of the relationships that I met while doing that.
And that's outstanding. The ride you've been on is awesome. My brother has a question in the chat already for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I see the chat questions anywhere?
I'm popping. It's on the screen right now. So you kind of blew by finding out about your father's service. After that, did he talk to you about it? Did it bother you not knowing about it in the first place?
I think that he came up at a time, we've talked about it a lot later. We especially talked about it, when I was gearing up to deploy and stuff. But he came up at a time where, the way he said it, when I left Texas, that's where he got his DD-214 in Texas. When I left Texas, I was able to hitchhike basically to the Mason-Dixon line in uniform. And then once I hit the Mason-Dixon line, I had to take the uniform off in order to hitchhike home. And, he lived in Providence, Rhode Island. And they were not, at the time up north, not a lot of love for Vietnam vets. And so I think that whole generation of veterans was taught to hide that away. And he became a social worker that specialized in working with older people. And he loved that job. And then my mom got pregnant, and it didn't pay very much. So he kind of begrudgingly, between all that, he went to college. He's the first member of our family to go to college and graduated valedictorian of his college, and had the opportunity to get a GS job. And so he did that. And that's why I was able to spend so much time in Italy. He was able to get a job working in Naples, and we lived on the economy because he's Italian. and was fluent. And so I grew up basically as an Italian kid, so I was fluent. And it was great. It was great. It was idyllic. It was a very happy childhood until I came and met up with all the massholes, and became one. So,
heck yeah. I got another question from @GMoneyFallon. Your first film, Range 15, topped the charts, and your documentaries like Send Me and Not a War Story have been critically acclaimed. What drives you to tell these stories, and why is it important to share veterans' experiences through media?
I think, and this is coming from my wife and my female friends. I am a very empathetic person. I have I unabashedly will cry in a theater. Like, it doesn't bother me to show human emotion at all. And, I don't know, what your background entirely is, Rich, but I'll just say, I don't personally feel like in uniform I ever got to that moment where I was like, I'm going to die here or anything like that. I didn't even get, close to that moment. But, I had a couple of moments where I had that massive concern for my guys. And it is very easy for me when I hear stories from people that have really gone through it, that have really been tested, and you hear about them losing, their soldiers, their airmen, their sailors in horrible situations where they could do nothing about it. It's very easy for me to go, I can imagine being there. I can, I know how like X could have gone differently, Y could have gone differently. And I think that so often filmmakers try to tell a cooler version in their mind, a harder version. I think that it is the preference of filmmakers to either paint veterans as, am I allowed to swear on this?
Yes.
Okay. As completely fucking broken, like they need somebody to take care of them kind of thing, or unbreakable Jason Statham stacking bodies left and right like it's nothing kind of people. And I think I think that telling stories where you get to actually see in their faces how they felt and how they and what drives them, and all those things, I think that's really critical. Now, Range 15, that's different. Range 15 was kind of an FU. It was, our motto for that movie was, after watching this, you'll never thank a veteran for their service again. Yep. And the whole idea of Range 15 is every stupid conversation that veterans have, when you're deployed, when you're at Ranger School sitting in a foxhole, literally, and it's raining on you and the foxhole's full of water, and you're like, Ranger instructor, can I get out of the foxhole? And they're like, as they're sitting there in a poncho, smoking a cigarette, going, no, you've got to stay tactical. Like, all right,
eating a sandwich.
I guess I'll just die right here in this hole. But all the stupid conversations you have, that it seemed hilarious to you guys, but would be horrifying to everyone else. The idea of Range 15 was, let's make that a movie. Like, all the things that we talk about, all the dumb, dark jokes, that's a movie. So that was purely for the veteran community. The documentary about Range 15, called Not a War Story, is a film I'm very proud of. And I did that with Tim O'Donnell, who's just a very talented filmmaker, because I think that showed why it was important to all of us. Send Me, I never expected to make that documentary. Basically what happened is I threw a camera in my backpack because I knew it was an important moment in history. And I was like, I'll capture things whenever we're not working. And then at the end of it, I just sat everybody down that wanted to talk, and I interviewed them while they were still raw, so like Sea Spray, guy had lost 37 pounds in 10 days, doing nothing but just run and help everybody that he could, Tim, he got off the plane, his pants were covered in, sewer water and shit from, climbing through the sewers. Everybody was just absolutely fucking smoked. And so I interviewed him, and I wasn't ever meant to be on film. And I got back, and Hollywood Hurd, he was an Air Force pilot in the 80s, and then went on to be a filmmaker, and for about 25 years in Hollywood. He was at the airport when I landed at 1 a.m. with my wife and a camera. Wow. And I was like, bro, I'm not doing this. Like, let's do this tomorrow. And he goes, dude, if you do this tomorrow, you're going to have your West Point hat on, and you're going to give me some clean officer shit answers. And right now you're exhausted, and we're going to talk. And my wife was like, yeah, we need to talk. And so we filmed like a 2-hour interview, literally at like 1 a.m. And I was pissed. But that like really raw kind of, this is how I feel in the moment, didn't become the main story, because the main story is really about Sea Spray and Sean G and Tim. And, those guys are like they're the main characters, I'm like the spunky supporting character, but it became like the skeleton for what's, send me as the interview. I almost became the narrator of the overarching piece, and their stories were the meat of it, if that makes sense. And we qualified for Academy Award voting. And I heard through the grapevine that we probably would have made the short list, but Disney very randomly had a documentary crew that was following around a special forces team, and that team got deployed, and for whatever reason, the government let them go with them. And so, I'm blanking on the name. I want to say it was Retrograde or something like that, but they qualified on the short list. So we got bumped out by the Disney version, which is, totally fair. But it was a big deal to be considered. And that was a nice moment. But, documentary filmmaking, I think is really important. You're never gonna, unless you get really lucky, I guess a handful of people get lucky every now and then. But documentary filmmaking, you usually lose money. It's not common to make a lot of money. Send Me, every dollar that Send Me made went to Save Our Allies, which is the organization that Sarah Verardo, Chad Robichaud, Tim Kennedy, and I founded in the wake of Afghanistan. And those dollars, went towards safe houses that we kept going. And, we got our last person out of a safe house about, 2.5 months ago. And those are safe houses that we stood up, and like, I don't want to get the date wrong, because again, the people will come out of the woodwork and say you're off by a month. But basically the beginning of 2022 is when we started standing up our own safe houses in Pakistan. So,
Yeah, there was a question, where can people find these documentaries? Are they on Netflix? I know they're on Amazon Prime and stuff.
Yeah. So let's see. You can watch Range 15 on Amazon Prime. You don't have to pay extra for that. It's on there. Not a War Story was on Amazon Prime. Now it's available for purchase, but not. It's available for purchase, I think, just on Amazon Prime. Then Send Me is on Amazon Prime. You don't have to pay for that. And then my new one, Office Joe, is for sale on Amazon, Apple TV, and Google Play, YouTube.
Awesome. Yeah, we got another question in here from
Of course.
From Krishma on Google Text. Nick, as someone who's built multiple successful businesses, what's one piece of advice you'd give to someone just starting their entrepreneurial journey, especially veterans transitioning out of the military?
Yeah, that's a great one. That's a great question. So the biggest thing, there's a couple things, but the biggest thing that you have to know right out of the gate is that your idea sucks. And I don't mean that as an insult. I am telling you that whatever you think is this great idea, the iteration that you have in your head right now sucks. It's going to be wrong. And your ability to simultaneously stick with it, but also iterate and change it until you get something that the customer finds valuable and meaningful is going to determine your success. So like, there's like a graph, so to speak, right? If you have nothing but grit, you will end up bankrupt because you won't quit. You're too tough. You're too focused. But if somebody needs a pair of pants and you keep trying to sell them hats, no amount of grit is going to cover their genitals. Right. You know what I'm saying? So grit without iteration, without flexibility will get you nowhere. On the other axis, you have iteration. I launched 36 shirts when I started Ranger Up. 33 were terrible ideas. One was a great idea. 2 were okay ideas. So 3 SKUs are what kept me going. But because I had 3 wins out of 36, even though that's a terrible batting average, I was like, okay, I wasted all this money and I could say this is a failure, or I could say, well, wait, I got 3 right. What is it about those 3 that worked? And that's what I did. And I brainstormed stuff that was more like those 3. And then that next group, and that time I only did 2 new shirts, they both worked. And then I did 2 more new shirts. And then one of those worked and the other one kind of worked. And then I was like, okay, there's another failure. So what is it about that failure? This was a constant repetitive process for years. And my process kept getting better and better and better. And to put it in perspective, by the time that I was selling the company, I had created a very complex, model that you entered in multiple variables and it essentially spit out, this is what your first, order has to be. And it was typically right, plus or minus 50 to 100 shirts, which might sound like a lot, but it wasn't by the time Ranger Up was really at its peak. So, you start where you start and you keep getting better and you keep improving. And as you grow, the challenges become greater. So, the first major challenge is get something that works. The second major challenge is you're at a point where you can hire your first employee. It all gets harder once you hire the first employee. Then you have a challenge where you don't have enough money and you can't borrow enough money from friends and family to make it work. You need a bank loan or you need an investor, right? I mean, they keep getting bigger and bigger. By the time I sold the company, I was on the hook for like a couple $1 million in loans for inventory. So like the stress level goes high, but it's always going to be twice as hard, cost 3 times as much, and take 4 times as long as you think it's going to be successful. You have to be committed to the journey.
Outstanding answer. And another question popped in as you were saying that one.
Yeah.
This one is from at Jen Talks Beer. Your films and documentaries have had major impact. Why do you think storytelling, especially from a veteran's perspective, is so powerful, and how can others share their stories effectively?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that when veterans are willing to tell their story, they tend to be way more honest than other people. And I think that comes from the environment of, constantly AARing, right? Constantly having that after action review. You're almost trained, like, I have to be honest about what went well, what didn't go well. And their stories are often, just so dramatic in comparison to everyday people. And that's true even of people that didn't deploy. Like, if you think about some of the things that you do in training, or some of the things that are expected of you, and that I just think it's an interesting cohort of people. The other piece of it is that, contrary to what the media tells you, or even for that matter, a lot of nonprofits tell you, veterans are far more successful and far more entrepreneurial than anybody would have you believe. Veterans are actually the most successful cohort of entrepreneurs in the country. I don't know if any of you knew that or not. Veteran businesses succeed far more than non-veteran businesses. And so you have people that have a lot of discipline, that have a lot of interesting experiences, that have, often traveled the world, often been in combat, often been around people they wouldn't normally be around, friend groups they wouldn't normally have. And they have a desire to do interesting things. And so when you tell their stories, they tend to be interesting stories. And then, so the second part of your question is, how do you tell an effective story? I think the best stories come from people that are willing to show that they are not perfect, that they are fallible. When I wrote Scars and Stripes with Tim, he put a lot of things in that book that are really embarrassing. Most of the world at that point did not know that, at one point Tim had 2 different women pregnant at the same time. They didn't know that he was at the brink of, taking his own life. They didn't know that his entire special forces team beat the crap out of him for being arrogant. These are all things that, like, people don't share, and he did. And that's what made that book, I think, so powerful. The book that I have coming out in August, I didn't plan on doing. It wasn't on my bingo card. I met this gentleman, Eric Tansey, who, he had been a former special operations dude, and but he left the military literally to chase the girl, and it shouldn't have worked, right? Like, she didn't even know he was getting out of the military to chase her. So by the time he got to her, she was actually dating another guy, and she's like, "What are you doing here?" And he's like, "Well, you told me you weren't going to date a military guy long term, and you left, so I got out to date you." And she's like, "Why didn't you tell me this? Like, I'm dating this other dude." And he was like, You're going to break up with him. We're going to date. I'm going to go tell him." And he literally did. And the guy was like, "I'm not breaking up with her." But long story short, he won. They have 5 kids. And he's doing great. He's a character, as you can tell, because normal people don't do that. But Eric became a police officer in the Southeast District of Raleigh. And I had a mutual friend, and they were like, "You got to have this guy on your podcast." And so I did. And the guy had me crying the whole time in laughter, because he tells these stories where often he's the butt of the joke of him trying to be a cop in the Southeast District and, like, everything going wrong. So I told Eric, like, "Man, you got to do a book. You've got to write a book." And he's like, well, I actually have a collection of short stories that I wrote for catharsis. Do you want to read them? And they were hilarious. They were very good. And I was like, man, you should get a professional writer, and you should pitch this to a major house, because I think you have something here. And he's like, can you introduce me to anybody? So I reached out to Amar Deol, who was my editor on Scars and Stripes. And I was like, hey man, you read this book. Tell me what you think. And he read it. And he was like, man, this guy's really funny. He just needs like a professional writer to come in and like turn this into a book. And I was like, yeah, I know. That's why I'm introducing you. It's like, you know, do you have somebody? And he goes, I'll tell you what, I'm going to give him a deal. And I'm like, oh, that's amazing, man. Thank you. I'm going to give him a call. He's going to be so happy. And he goes, no, I'm not done. I'll give him a deal, but you have to write it with him. And I was like, and at the time, it didn't happen. It didn't happen. But at the time, I was in the hunt for Sylvester Stallone's book. I was potentially going to be writing that. And I was like, man, like, you know, he's Italian, I'm Italian, like he's a filmmaker, I'm a, you know, micro filmmaker, like, you know, this should work. And that book deal didn't happen. And I went back to Eric and I was like, but I didn't know that yet. I went back to Eric and I was like, hey man, here's the deal. Simon & Schuster will take you on, but only if I write it. And he goes like doe-eyed. He's like, will you write it with me? And I was like, oh man, son of a. So, but it ended up being like a truly incredible experience. Eric's amazing. You know, when everything happened in Western North Carolina, he was out there, you know, and he's not necessarily affiliated with Save Our Allies. Like we immediately deployed, you know, our teams out there, but Eric was out there like in his own truck, you know, with like a winch and cables and an axe and just helping people. And he actually gave us like a ton of intelligence, like, hey, this guy at this grid is doing this, like he needs help. They don't have food, they don't have water. And we'd be either sending our guys or contacting the National Guard or, you know, so he's like a superhuman being, but his stories, I never truly appreciated how hard it is to be a cop until I worked on this book with him, because, you know, he even admits, like, going into it from the military, he thought it'd be easy. And it was anything but. It was anything but. It's a wild ride. So that's open for pre-order now. It's called Pig Latin.
Pig Latin.
And Pig Latin comes out August 25th. But, you know, you can get it right now on, you know, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, the usual suspects. I moved and now I'm blurry on your screen. I'm just going to keep moving until it clears.
It'll come back. Yeah.
There we go. I'm back.
You mentioned the Scars and Stripes. I know just recently, you also said earlier, things have to be perfect and every fact has to be true. And that goes right to that book. And I've seen the bros going after him and going after that book hard for probably the last 2 weeks now or so, 3 weeks or so.
Yeah, it's been really rough. You know, I don't want to go into it. I don't want to go into it too much.
Right. I knew that's what was coming up. I didn't want to poke the bear or nothing, but
I'll say this, right? Everybody is, you know, welcome to their opinion. I don't, as a rule, I just don't disparage people. Like, you know, people are going to say what they want to say. There are certainly things that we got wrong in the book by, you know, but my strong feeling is that the things that we got wrong are fairly semantic or were obviously clear embellishments, you know? So like, you know, and Tim's talked about this. And I hate to because it just opens doors and then I'm sitting here arguing with people and I don't want to do that. I don't have beef with anybody. I know this. Tim Kennedy is one of the best people that I've ever met. I have watched him donate time. I have watched him go into harm's way. I have watched him cry his eyes out over, over Afghans, over lost buddies, over kids, over all the things he's donated his time for, doesn't take money for. And I think he told that story to the best of his ability. And I'll give you some very small examples. He got dragged because in the book, he says he was the distinguished honor grad and he was actually the enlisted leader, right, which is the second best thing, right? He thought he was. And when they said he wasn't, I was on a phone call with him and Af, who went to Ranger School with him and is now the 7th Special Forces Group Sergeant Major. And Af broke out, a picture of like Tim holding his, because we were looking for pictures and stuff. Af finds a picture and it's Tim holding a plaque. And so we're like, oh, there it is. There it is. We're good. And I had Af sent it to me and you couldn't read it because we're all old. So this is 20 some odd years. This is a real picture, not so he had to scan it with his phone, but he scanned it and you couldn't really read it because it's blurry. And so I gave it, I own a media company. I had my designers kind of go through and punch up and anyway, it's you can make out enlisted leader. And I'm like, fuck. And then I'm like, Tim, you were the enlisted leader. And he's like, is that different? This is a real fucking conversation that we had. But the people that don't want to believe that, that these are honest mistakes, they're never going to accept that. They're like, see, we're right. He's a liar. So, how do you fight that battle? And I don't know what's in their hearts. I don't know these guys. I have some mutual friends. I have some people that tell me, hey, they're great guys. Maybe they are. I'm not. But I have 20 years of watching Tim do the right thing. And, and I think that even if these guys feel it was acceptable to call him out, he got called out. He's been dragged. Everybody knows it. Yeah. We're now at a point where it's what is the goal? Everybody's now made their decision, right? You've dropped a hammer on him. He replied. Some people think he's great. Some people think he's the worst. The relentless barrage now, what is the goal? Are you trying to get him to kill himself? What are you trying to do? I honestly don't know now. What are you trying to do? There's no argument that he was in this battle and that it was an intense battle. And everybody that fought in that battle, we all owe, a large debt to. Right. So now I'm what are we now trying to do? You called him out. He's been hammered. I know the internet, he'll be hammered for the rest of his life because it's just the way it goes.
It'll never go away. Yeah.
And he's responded. What are we doing now? There is a point where it's okay, is the goal to end this guy's life? Because they're coming hard nonstop. And then all of the remoras of society have jumped on this bandwagon and they're creating their own thing. You know what I mean? The guys that are just, I don't know what the goal is.
And you don't know the end goal for them, for that group, what they're trying to get at.
Because I know guy, for example, Anthony, he does Stolen Valor. We all know Anthony, Anthony does his job begrudgingly, if that makes sense. He doesn't want to be this guy. He does it thoroughly. He gives people the opportunity to address it. And then he lays it out. This is different. This is like, there's some joy, it seems like, in this, you know? And again, like, I don't know these guys. So if that isn't the case, like, I hope it isn't the case, but like at some point, you know, what are we doing? That's kind of where, like, again, like, I'm an old dude. I'm like, what are we doing? Because let me put it another way. I know a lot of people that a lot of people say a lot of things about it. And, you know, it's like, oh, this guy says this, but he wasn't quite that cool or whatever. It's like, you know, everybody looks back on their time in service and sees themselves one way, and other people are going to see it another way. And like, you know, nobody's 100% right. But there's a lot of people on this planet that are doing bad things. And we look, you know, and we're not even dealing with it. And then it's like, let's just say hypothetically speaking, right? And I don't believe this is true, but let's say hypothetically speaking, everything they say is right. And Tim embellished his service. Okay. Like,
so now what? Yeah.
Now what?
Yeah.
Have you ever been to a bar before? Have you ever, you know, like, I mean, I'm not saying it's nothing, but, you know, like, I cannot imagine spending my time trying to harm other people.
Right.
Specifically at this point for a period of time. So that's where, like, I don't get it. But again, it's not my, and to be super clear, Tim doesn't want anybody fighting this for him.
Right.
He's like, it's my fight, you know, and
I think he's proven through his actions. I think he's proven through his actual actions in service, out of service, in between service, actually. That's still serving now. But
that's the Tim that I know.
Yeah, the things he's doing. He went to Afghanistan on his time.
Yeah.
To go do that and try to save all our brothers and sisters over there.
Yeah, and he did. He did. He legitimately saved a lot of people, and I know other people have comments about that. Like, we can go on, and you know, I'll say this: I wish those guys well. I hope that they find whatever they need. You know, I'll stand by Tim till the day I die. I hope we get to a point at some point where everybody kind of works it out. Yes. Do I anticipate that? You know, probably not. But you know, here we are.
Yeah, here we are right now.
Here we are.
We got another question though.
Yeah,
it has nothing to do with that though. All right. So at Sal E Just Raff, your new series Office Joe is streaming now. Congrats. Mm-hmm. What inspired the concept, and what can we look forward to seeing from you in the future?
Yeah. So, you know, I talked about it a little bit already. Transition is hard. And I don't know a single veteran, even people that landed on their feet and did extremely well, that didn't struggle a little bit with going from the incredible purpose of defending the country to whatever they did next. Because, you know, I have a son that's deployed right now. And you know, before he deployed, I told him, unless you get elected president of the United States at some point, you are never going to have a job as good as platoon leader.
Yep.
It's, you know, the only job that might be better is platoon sergeant, you know, but like, I didn't get the opportunity to do that. But you know, you're never going to have a better job where you're, you know, you're the leader, but you're one of the guys and you're in it, and the work is meaningful and it's personal and it's, and there's real camaraderie. And so, you know, when you get out like that piece is missing immediately, and it leaves a hole in everyone. I don't know anybody that even the most sarcastic a-hole still is like, man, like, this is weird. Yep. And then the second thing that you miss out on is tribe. when you're in the military, you can get a divorce and your whole life can fall apart, but there's still a bunch of people around you making sure that you're eating and sleeping and getting to PT. And, you can blow all your money on beer and Mustangs on the second of the month and have nothing left, but you're still going to eat. You're still going to eat. You're still going to sleep. Like you're going to, the tribe gets you through it.
Right.
Well, when you get out, that's gone. Maybe you went from having a dozen buddies around you to now you're back in your hometown that maybe wasn't that great in the first place. Or maybe you're a person like me where you land at a school and everybody has an opinion about Iraq or Afghanistan or whatever, and your buddies are there and they're making these glib comments and they're emotionally taxing on you. And you want to like get mad, but you also know if you get mad, you're going into a stereotype and then the guilt comes on. Should I be over there? I mean, and on and on and on. Right. So transition is hard. And then I also felt like our community hasn't had anything fun in a long time. Right. It's been nothing but sadness. It was, Iraq and then Afghanistan and then, all of the, lung diseases and having to fight Congress to take care of, very obvious problems associated with burn pits. And it's just, we just stack all of this misery. And, I wanted to, first and foremost, make the community laugh. It's what I've always enjoyed. Just have fun, just do something fun, kind of a range 15 you can watch with your teenage kids or your civilian friends, and they won't think that you're a crazy person. But then the second piece was, I just wanted to remind everybody that transition is supposed to be weird. Yeah. It's, when you get into the military, it's weird. Basic training doesn't feel right, and then you're in AIT and that feels like a little better, but still not quite right. And then, you get to your unit and they mess with you for a while because you're new. And, like there's a process to getting used to the military, just like there's a process to getting out, except on the way out, nobody's there to guide you.
Right.
And so the show has, first and foremost, it's just funny. But second, it's kind of like you get to watch Joe on his journey, slowly figuring it out. And I just thought that was important. And that was my motivation. Next, I've got a movie in development that involves amateur wrestling. And I also am, hopefully going to be moving into, pre-production for Office Joe season 2.
Nice.
But we're still working on, some deals for Office Joe season 1. So I got to kind of get that done before I get to make season 2. But, and then, I've got great clients with Diesel Jack and, the American Legion and Student Veterans of America are incredible. I get to work with them, all the time. The American Legion actually surprised the hell out of me and came on board and sponsored Office Joe.
Wow.
And I was surprised because it's out there. Like it's not PG. And, they were, when we were talking about it, they said, look, veterans aren't PG and we need to meet this generation of veterans, where they are, not on an ivory tower, not where we think they should be. And, it's a storied tradition for veterans to enjoy humor, whether you're talking about, Bob Hope, or Range 15. And so, they came on as the title sponsor for Office Joe. And I really think that's one of the coolest things in the world is to have like an organization that's been around since the aftermath of World War I.
All right.
Supporting our project.
That's outstanding. That's an outstanding accomplishment. On top of all the other things you've done, of course, you've done it all, really, from military service, business success, global rescues, award-winning storytelling. What else can we look for from you what do you think you have left in your kit bag to give to the world as you move forward?
Man, I hope I'm just starting. I hope I'm just getting started. That's how I feel. I don't. One of the biggest things that transitioned in my life is I realized at some point, and I don't know exactly when it happened, I realized I had to move away from focusing on results to focusing on doing whatever I wanted to do. And so, I'll give you an example. And this is an example I've given a couple times, and it's simple, but I think most people will understand it. I started wrestling my freshman year of high school, and I was terrible. I was just good enough to make the varsity team, but I wasn't really good enough to be on varsity. And it was because it was our first varsity season. We had been a club team prior to my freshman year. And we were so new that when we got to the sectional tournament at the end of the year, we had never had anybody place in it, which if you're a school that's been around for any period of time, that's not a huge accomplishment. But for us, it was like the boogeyman. It was like, oh my God, we're at sectionals. And so my freshman year, I lost my very first match. It was a pigtail match, which means that was the only match I got. And I was like, man, someday I want to place in this. That was the goal that I made. Well, I placed the next year. I worked very hard in the off season. Well, it had been all about the goal. Now that goal was gone. So I had to make another goal. And my goals kept changing. And, what started as I'm going to place in sectionals someday, by the time I was a senior, it was like, if I don't win the state championships, I'm a failure. And I didn't. I got beat by the state champ by a point.
Oh, wow.
And so all of a sudden, that felt like failure. And then in college, I was on the team, but I was on the team as a walk-on, even though I had been recruited at MIT and I had been recruited at Boston University. At West Point, just like they didn't have, because they were stacked in my weight, they didn't have a spot. So I got to practice about half the time. I had a chip on my shoulder about it. And I was like, was it all worth it? Right? Like, oh, I wasted this time. Like, because I was so focused on the result instead of the process.
Right.
And so I took a sport that I loved, and it became a thing that whenever I thought about wrestling, I mean, think about this. Like I was able to wrestle, in a D1 program, if not as much as I wanted, but I was able to wrestle there. I was accepted there. I was a state place finisher. I came very close to being the guy, from a guy that had only wrestled for 4 years. And I looked at it like a failure. Like it literally gave me an uneasy feeling. I was like, I suck.
Wow.
But if you had asked Nick, the freshman, hey man, right now, if I told you that was ever possible, what would you say? Like I would have taken that in a heartbeat. I would have been like, absolutely. You're going to like, there's no, I couldn't even conceive a pathway to getting that good. And so I ruined a sport I loved. Instead of seeing opportunity, instead of seeing advancement, instead of seeing a process, I made it about the end result. And if I didn't get the end result, it was misery. I didn't appreciate wrestling again until my battalion commander forced me to coach the Gießen High School wrestling team, because the chaplain's kid was on the wrestling team and he was good, and they had lost their coach due to a PCS. And I was like, sir, I don't want to do it. And he's like, I don't care what you want to do. You get to leave work every day at 4 so you can go coach Gießen High School. And guess what happened? All of a sudden, the results didn't matter. I no longer had any skin in the game. Now I was just helping kids. Well, unless you're a jerk, nobody wants to let kids down. So then you're like, okay, what does this kid need? Right. So then it became like a process of learning, like, okay, this kid's tall and skinny and he's good at this. So I got to learn moves for tall, skinny guys, something you've met me, that's not me. So, I got to figure that out. And this kid is short with big legs, but his arms aren't that strong. So we got to come up with some stuff that works for him. And you start going through this process of like learning, and all of a sudden the sport's fun again. Because I wanted my kids to win, but I wasn't teaching them that they had to win. I was teaching them like, hey, let's do the best you can. Let's figure this out. Let's improve on every iteration. And so it's been a process of getting there. But now, no matter what I do, that's my approach. Like, hey, I'm going to make a TV show. Maybe it'll be a giant hit. Maybe a few people buy it. But like, I've done it and I'm proud of it. I'm going to write a cop book. I never expected to do that. I did it. I'm proud of it. I think it's a great book. I think it's the best book I could have written. Maybe people will say this sucks, but it was still the best I could do. So I enjoyed the process, and I know that Eric is appreciative of it. And so maybe it's a bestseller, maybe it's not, but there's nothing else I could have given to it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. That's 100%. That's awesome right there.
But it took me a while to get there. All of this stuff comes from failure, stacked on failure.
But without failures, we don't know how we can succeed. So you've learned from everything to move forward. Right. And that's something we try to, I guess, preach here at the Misfit Nation. It doesn't matter how many times you fall; it's how many times you get back up and keep running forward, run back into that brick wall again, and then figure out how to fly through that brick wall.
Mm-hmm. That's a Marine approach. You could put a ladder. You could just make a ladder.
Exactly. Yeah. There are ladders out there these days. Yes. Outstanding. Nick, what's the 3 things you can tell the Misfit Nation right now they can start doing tomorrow to make their lives more successful?
Yeah. The first and foremost, just remember that you only have one life, and you should be using it however you want to use it, with no concern what other people think about how you're using it. There is a false impression, especially among young people, that other people are worrying about you, and they are not. No one cares what you're doing. They are too worried about their own lives. They're worried about their money problems, their relationships, their jobs. You are an afterthought at best, and probably not a thought. And so if you're making decisions about the brief period of time you have on this rock based on what you think other people might think about you, you are wasting time. The second thing is, despite that and the impending death we all have coming, you have a lot of time if you make good use of it. And what I mean by that is fearlessly trying anything that you want to try. I don't want to dime him out in a bad way or anything, but I have a friend that is an elite wrestler. He is a world-class wrestler, literally. And he is getting close to 30. He's not there yet. And he's been improving every year, and he's in the mix, and he's a kind of guy that could win a gold medal in the Olympics type dude. But he's not quite there yet, but he's in the mix. And he said to me, he called me. I'm a guy that a lot of people call because I give great advice for anybody not named Nick Palmisciano, in which case I give the shittiest advice ever. But he called me and he was like, I'm thinking about leaving this because I'm falling behind. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, other people my age, they've already had, a couple of jobs, and they're moving up the ladder, and I was like, bro, let me stop you right there. you're so young. You have so much time. It's like, do you still love wrestling? He's like, yeah, I love it. There's nothing I want to do more. I was like, well, I love it too, man. And you know what I can't do? Vie for an Olympic championship. But if I could, I promise we'd trade places. So while you can, so long as you still love it, keep trying, because this other stuff is easy to learn. And then, I was like, I didn't get into the workforce until, I was in the military, and then I was doing this. So like, so we're, and that kind of gave him some perspective. What you don't want to be doing is sitting around waiting for the perfect thing. You have to be doing something, and then the third thing is, a reminder that we are not meant to be perpetually happy. And so I think that one of the reasons why we have so many people that, whether you call it mental illness, or you say that they are, they have suicidal ideation, or they, any of the things, right? There's a false belief, like throughout all of human history, people have suffered, and they've had to survive, and they've had to fight to survive. And at some point in the last 30, 40, 50 years, we've decided that, if we're not living in bliss, then we're a failure. Well, I mean, actually, like anything that I've ever done that's meaningful had very little bliss. It was hard work. It was stress. It was grind. It was, how am I going to figure it out? And knowing that, you get to really enjoy it when you're happy, and you get to appreciate that the bottom, when you're unhappy, isn't going to stay there. But also reminder that the bottom is, to put it in military parlance, time to get off the X. Like, you can't perpetually stay in this unhappiness. And so, like, it doesn't matter what it is. Like, you're unhappy with your marriage, fix it if you can. Get out of it if you can't. And I'm not saying that glibly, but like, take action. Do everything you can to fix it. If you can't, then move on. You hate your job, get out of your job. I'm not saying throw it away instantly. You can go look for another job. You've built up a company and you don't want to do it anymore. There's nothing that says you have to stay there. There's nothing that says you have to continue doing anything. So, when you're in that bad place, you have to aggressively fight to get out of it, whatever that thing is. Because if you stay there long enough, then it's not just a miserable experience. Life becomes miserable. So those are my 3 Italian quick hits, because Italians can't do anything quickly.
Outstanding. They're all in the chat right now. I posted everything you said into the chat. So that's outstanding. Nick, what's the best way for the Misfit Nation to get in contact with you if they just want to chat with you, maybe get you on their show?
Yeah, I answer everybody that I can. I'm really good about it. I might not get back to you like in the same instant. You can write me at nick@dieseljackmedia.com if you want to email me. I answer Instagram the most. You can write me on Facebook. You can also write me on X. X and Instagram are probably my 2 favorites. I have a TikTok. I've never even posted anything. I honest to God have a TikTok just to monitor all the companies that we make things for. But someday I might post something. So X Instagram or email. I'm pretty good about answering.
All right, I posted those in the chat as well. Nick, it's been great chatting with you tonight.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you for taking your time tonight to hang out with us here on the Misfit Nation. And you have a great Christmas, as that's just next week, obviously.
You as well.
We're both old, and we're moving into Christmas now in our 50s, or you're close to 50, me in my 50s.
I'm not there yet, but I'm damn close now.
I'm blazing the trail for you, so we're there.
You know how it is.
It's beautiful, but
Thank you again for hanging out with us and Misfit Nation. You guys have been great tonight. Remember to love everyone around you. Like Nick said tonight, don't hold grudges. Get mad, get over it, and just lead a good life. And that's what we need everyone in the world to do these days. And we'll be back in 2 and 2, Nick.
This message is from the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Did you serve in the military? If so, you can obtain a free lifetime pass to more than 2,000 federal recreation sites. These sites are located across more than 400 million acres of public lands, including national parks, wildlife refuges, and forests. The lands host activities to fit any lifestyle: hiking, biking, fishing, camping, and much more. Gold Star families are also eligible for these free lifetime passes. Plus, they cover entrance fees for a driver and all passengers in a car, or up to 3 additional adults at sites that charge per person. Obtaining one is easy. Just go to the National Park Service website, nps.gov, or the National Park Service app.
Thanks for checking us out and being a part of the Misfit Nation show. Don't forget to visit our website at themisfitnation.com. That's themisfitnation.com. Check out all our past episodes and get some of the great Misfit Nation gear for you and your family. As always, be humble, stay hungry, and keep hustling, because we are
Misfit Nation. Misfit Nation.